What do you think?
Good.
Race cars? You gonna have one someday?
When I get bigger.
When you get bigger?
I just got bigger so I can ride
Yeah.
this.
You can drive this now?
Yeah.
Really?
And I got bigger like this.
Okay. Well, we'll talk about it. We're probably gonna start off in go-karts, okay?
Can you go with me?
Well, yeah. Of course.
Can Mommy go with me or don't?
Of course.
Mommy's not gonna go with me, but Mommy's gonna stay home.
What's up, guys? As I'm putting the car together, I want to start making some of these videos to kind of share some of the things I've learned and share some of the things that I can share. And one of the things I've always thought there was a lot of misunderstanding around, especially when you ask people if they're using them or not, and the responses that you get is a bearing spacer. I know a lot of people just say, well, we just leave our bearings a little loose, lock them in place, we got a keeper ring, and it does not have a lot of rolling resistance. It spins pretty freely. There are some issues with that. Doing what I do for a living, I know I deal with bearings a lot, and when you do not have that tapered roller bearing set to the proper clearances so that bearing can manage the load that it's experiencing, you're going to end up with premature wear failure. You're going to, as a driver in a race car, one of the things that you will have is a different feel. We're getting so accurate at the tuning in these cars now as the night goes on with the smashing machine, and as tracks improve their conditions and we're running a more consistent track every night, smoother tracks. Us as drivers, we can feel a lot, especially as we advance our programs, get better notebooks, get our race cars more consistent night to night. So this kind of, to me, comes down to the feel of the car. And if you have bearings that you intentionally leave a little loose to not have them have a lot of rolling resistance, as this one does, I've already torqued this to 18 foot-pounds, which is the recommended torque value on this bearing, actually, from Timken. You could technically measure the amount of resistance here. I do have a load cell. We could technically figure out how much resistance is here. I don't think that's needed to prove the point. As you can see, this is about as hard as I can spin this thing. And, we might get 2 revolutions out of this. By the time that we're done here, this thing will probably sit here in free spool enough that I could probably go in the house, get a drink of water, and come back out. So getting back to why a bearing spacer, this is going to allow you to torque your nut to the torque that it needs. And this is going to capture those inner races and set the spacing. So as you think of your stack up and you put your cups and your bearings together, you're basically setting the clearance between the outer race, the rolling element, and the inner race. Now you need to have, like I said, a certain amount of clearance here. Now technically DRP says you can have half a thou to no clearance in this, because there isn't a lot of expansion going on here, not a ton of heat. However, I would say that probably you could go to 0 clearance, but to get the most out of these things, I have figured out a little bit of a procedure to do that accurately and actually ensure that you are, without a doubt, actually to 0 clearance and not just too short on this, and still compressing those rolling elements into the races and preloading in a sense. So, like I said, I have torqued this down, spun it. You can see how hard it is to spin. So what I do is, you open these things up a bit, slide them on, set this thing until you got some clunking going on, basically, and slowly start to run this thing out until you physically don't hear that. And then after that, where's where the precision comes in a little bit. I have the actual DRP hub play end gauge. Very handy. You don't need it. You could do this with a mag base or an indicator. It's kind of difficult to get it to stay on the spindle, and stay on a consistent point. I know this is expensive. I think they're $160, $180, but to get this set right, if you don't have one, ask somebody, borrow one, or you can get by with a mag base and an indicator. I'm just a little too critical on getting things set accurately. So I'm going to take this apart, now I've shown, and start to install this. So, and you can see, and I'll stop along the way to show you why I'm doing certain things at certain points. This will save you a lot of time instead of on off guessing rotations, guessing how much. And one of the other things that you're going to need, I guess I forgot, is some calipers. They don't have to be 6-inch. You could use a micrometer, basically any precise measuring tool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this all apart, do this freehand until I feel that sloppiness go away. I'll put the indicator on, see if there's anything there. I'm going to, usually you kind of stop feeling it at about 15 thousandths, 10 thousandths. And then what I'll do is I will measure the length of this with my calipers, and then just do some simple math. And then I will just extend it, lock it down to 1,000th clearance, put it back together. And also, these bearings do not have any grease in them at this time. You want to do this dry, because everybody packs bearings differently, usually overpacks them. And also, I do use the DRP ultra low drag grease. Now, do I think this is a 100% necessity for this? No. But it does come with a really nice syringe to pack the bearing and get that just right. Now, this whole syringe will do 8 hubs total. And really, when you're packing a bearing, guys, you don't have to pack it until it's falling out. The way these bearings are in here and the way the cages are on these bearings, you really just need to be able to fill the cage and get the raceway a little lubricated. Other than that, that's really all you need. So really, in theory, if you didn't want to pay for this, this is a high-end grease, you could then use this syringe, reload it, and use it on your typical bearing grease. Now, the Kluber grease, I know I use it for work, is some really nice stuff. Like I said, not a necessity, but definitely nice to have. So, I'm going to take this apart and we'll start on the install of this. These are also directional. Maybe I should highlight that. You can see outer race, bearing spacer. Gonna insert my hub so you can kind of see the stack up here. Insert the hub, inner race. This captures those inner races. Alright, so I've taken that apart again, lengthened that a little bit. So I do have a little bit of slop, so I can show you. Let's closer here. So, as you can see here in this camera, we have about, now keep in mind this is a half thou indicator. So each line is a half a thousandths. So you can see the looseness because that spacer is a little bit longer than what we want. So just wanted to show you. Now, here comes the time-saving part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go full compression, full extension. I'm going to measure what that difference is, and then we're going to take the spacer out, measure it with calipers, shorten it up to get the clearance we want, and do it again. And then you should be set to tighten this down. Now normally you would take this and you would go on, off, on, off, on, off until you got it just right. By measuring this and measuring that stack up, you're going to cut all that out. So once you get close, you get a little bit of slop. Measure on the indicator, measure your the length on your spacer, lengthen it by the clearance you want to end up with, and then you're done. So I do have about 6 thousandths too long on that spacer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that spacer out. I'm going to shorten it exactly 6 thousandths. I'll put it back in. We'll probably be done. Like I said, 6 thousandths. Going to measure my overall length, which is 3,589. Pretty simple. You need to be 3,583. And then that should give us 0 clearance. Yes. There we have it, 3,583. Lock her down. Now keep in mind these are aluminum. You don't need to crank on this thing because you'll likely lift it, crack it, change the measurements on this thing. And then one final thing that I recommend that I learned the hard way, you know, we take these things out maybe quarterly or semi-annually to do our maintenance, make sure everything's good and tight and got no problems. Take a Sharpie, write your final length here, 3.583 in this case. That way, if this thing does come loose for some reason and the set screw comes loose, and you find that, you can always, you don't have to take the time to go back through that whole procedure again. You can save that time again. So I'm going to get a Sharpie, write my size on there. Got our size written on there, my chicken scratch. Put that on. We'll do one final check. Alright guys, this thing is set. It's got just under a half a thou. Close enough. So now this corner is done, and I'll get all the rest of the corners set, and then take back everything apart and go ahead and pack the bearings. So hopefully that helps. I know this is probably long for a bearing spacer video, but hopefully it helps, you know, justify the investment if you're thinking about it, and you know, help save you some time on the install. Alright guys, hopefully that helped you understand wheel bearing spacers a little bit. I think the next video I'm going to make is going to be on some smasher basics. It's probably the most valuable tool that I own, and that anybody really could have on a late model style car, really any race car for that matter, where you have some coilover assemblies or any spring loads that you want to measure. And I will be giving some little tips, tricks, hints, what we look at, maybe why, and kind of the advantages of having one of these machines available. The one I have here is actually this is the AccuForce fully automated graphing. It's a very expensive machine, but it is worth every penny. And one of our folks that we use for shocks, FRS, over in Indiana, Jeff, builds a really good shock, outside of the box type thinker. Good dude to work with. So if you need a good set of shocks, something custom made for what you need in your car, something you can't, not everybody else just can buy off the shelf, get a hold of Jeff. He'll help you out. I'll put his contact information in. All the shocks that I use in any of the cars that I build have FRS shocks in them. So, like I said, hopefully that helps. You understand why you would use bearing spacers and the advantages of taking the time and spending the money to do it and do it right. Thanks, guys.